Thanks for being a part of our study in Second Corinthians. We're in chapter 6 today. Paul had some issues to deal with while he was in Corinth, and some of it had to do with the evaluation of his ministry. The people were looking for somebody who's dressed well, and that was a big deal there. For example, in the pagan temples, if a man wore a really fancy hat, they listened to him better. If he wore fancy clothes, they listened to him. Eloquent speech was also very important. In fact, the content of the speech wasn't as important as was how well the speech was delivered. And then the third thing was they put a big stock in dreams and visions, knowledge. Today, appearance matters. Maybe not that much, but it does matter. Entertainment is huge in America. Entertaining speakers are very well received, and less entertaining speakers are not. And then the third thing is pastors, ministers, senior leaders, so on, they have knowledge that other people need and want to have. So those are the issues that were in Corinth, and they're somewhat today. Let's ask the question today of our leaders. What are we looking for in ministers? I was at a pastor's luncheon one day, and a friend of mine and I were walking out to our car after it was over, and the pastor said to me, he said, "Wow, that guy was really good at self-promotion." You know, Paul was pretty good at self-promotion, but he had a different reason for promoting himself, and that was to magnify the gospel. He knew that the gospel was bound up in who he was, and it needed to be important. So, Tony, why don't you read us some of the things he had to think of?
That is why Paul wrote, "We are putting no obstacle in anyone's way, so that no fault may be found with our ministry."
So his ministry is bound up with his person, and they're receiving his person. He has some qualifications for that. So why don't we read those?
Paul could say, "As servants of God, we have commended ourselves in every way through great endurance in afflictions, hardships, calamities, beatings, imprisonments, riots, labors, sleepless nights, hunger."
Wow, glad that wasn't part of my job description when I started pastoring, but it was part of his. Those are things he went through. You could sum all of that up under the category of self-giving love. So when we're looking for ministers, we need to look for ministers who have self-giving love at the core of their being. They may look good, great. They may have great wisdom, fine. They may be eloquent, okay. But at the heart, we need self-giving love. Now, if that's the big category, here's some subheadings. Why don't we read some of that?
By purity, knowledge, patience, kindness, holiness of spirit, genuine love, truthful speech, and the power of God, with the weapons of righteousness for the right hand and for the left.
When I read through that, I thought of one of my friends who really didn't dress very well, and he wasn't a really dynamic speaker. He did have a fair amount of knowledge. In fact, he had a bunch of knowledge. But he had those qualities inherent. He was loving, he was caring, he was kind, he was good, and he was effective. Those are the things we look for in a minister. Now, let's talk more about self-sacrifice, okay?
Paul said this about his life: "He lived in honor and dishonor, in ill repute and good repute. We are treated as impostors and yet are true, as unknown and yet are well known, as dying, and see, we are alive, as punished and yet not killed, as sorrowful yet always rejoicing, as poor yet making many rich, as having nothing and yet possessing everything."
Those verses reminded me of an article I read in our Baptist Mission magazine years ago about a family that built a church on the Smoky Mountain slum. Now, that slum is home to 30,000 people. It's in Manila, Philippines, and it sits on top of the city's landfill. Amazing. Now, the children of the pastor would go out and scavenge for food just like everybody else did, and they made that place their place of ministry and their home. They lived among the people. Now, again, I'm glad that wasn't part of my job description, but the heart of that is ministers are to have the kind of self-giving love and qualities of their heart that allow them to go through whatever comes their way. It is not about how they look or how well they speak or the special knowledge they have. It's about the character of their heart. Now, when I think back 2,000 years ago to the time of Paul, I can't imagine anybody not wanting Paul to be their teacher on how to live the Christian life. That was the case in Corinth. They weren't wanting to hear what he had to say. And so Paul had to say some things to them.
We have spoken frankly to you, Corinthians. Our heart is wide open to you. There is no restriction in our affections, but only in yours. In return, I speak as to children. Open wide your hearts also.
So at the bottom line of characteristics, self-giving love, living a cross-like life of self-surrender as Jesus did, having an open heart to people, that's the thing we ought to look for. Well, they might look good, they might speak well, they might have special knowledge, but more important is the condition of the heart, Paul would say. Now, I aim this at ministers, and I think it's important that we think about what characteristics the person we're listening to has. The person who is speaking is bound up in the message. However, the truth is we're all ministers. And so as we've talked about ministry, all of us, Tony, me, you, we have a responsibility to follow that. Thanks so much for being a part today. God bless you. You have a great day.